Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first face-to-face meeting. I think it's, except for 2 days, a year since we all met in this room. It was May the 13th when we had our first virtual meeting. On the whole, I think they went well. We only had one slight breakdown in the whole year, and that was when the IT failed on the YouTube and we had to do one application for a second time. But other than that, I think it all went well. I must say I've missed you all, missed seeing your faces. Now I'm going to have to try and remember how we used to work. Please can I welcome Councillor Swear to his first meeting with us. And when we have our new substitutes, I will welcome them as they attend. I don't think I need to welcome Councillor Cunningham, although he's a substitute tonight because he's been a member of our committee for many, many years. So I'll move straight on to the items. Item 1 is apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Bowers, who is being substituted by Councillor Cunningham, and I have apologies for absence also from Councillor Unsworth. I think everyone else is here. I'm trying to see. Yes. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Swear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to declare an MPI on agenda item 5A with regards to Gosfield because I am the ward member.
Thank you. You've had no part in this, so you're going to remain and vote?
No, I have attended parish council meetings, but I have not taken any part in discussion, so I intend to remain and vote.
Thank you very much indeed. Anyone else? No. Item 3. I have the minutes to actually sign tonight for the meeting of the 27th of April. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true record?
Move as a correct record, Chair.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. All those in favour that I sign them as a true record? Thank you very much indeed. That brings us on to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions under public question time this evening, as the questions and statements will be made prior to each application. We now come on to item 5, planning applications. We have no items in part B this evening, so we'll go straight on to part A applications. And the first application in part A is application number 2000653 REM, land to the west of Headingham Road, Gosfield. We have no speakers on this application, so I'm going to go straight to the presentation, which is going to be made by Melanie. Just like to point out for anyone watching on YouTube, Melanie is actually in the room, although you will see her picture on the screen. Thank you very much indeed, Melanie. Oh, there we go.
You can now hear me even louder. Thank you, Emma. So the application before you this evening is... Oh, wait there. Jump right to the conclusion.
You think we're starting at the end?
Yeah, I'll work that way backwards. Sorry about that. There we go. The application before you this evening is for the reserved matters in relation to the erection of 35 dwellings. The matters we're considering this evening is layout, appearance, scale and landscaping. And as Councillor Scattergood said, it's at land west of Headingham Road in Gosfield. My first slide shows the site location plan. It's probably better viewed on this screen here. To the right of the screen is Headingham Road, running north to south. At the bottom here is Meadway, And then the site area is outlined in red. The next few slides show photographs of the application site. So the views are, I'm standing with Meadway behind me looking northwards across the site, and then the bottom photograph is looking eastwards towards Headingham Road, which sits behind that row of trees. Again, the next photograph is eastwards across the site, looking towards Orchard Cottage and Gareside House, which are both located on Headingham Road. The photograph at the bottom shows where the public right-of-way that runs along the southern boundary of the site runs along in this direction. And just on the right-hand side of that photograph is number 22 Meadway. The next two photographs show an area of community land which forms part of the application site and was secured under the previous section 106 relating to the outline application, which secured that approximately half of the site would be retained as community land. And you can see in the top photograph, public right-of-way continues. Sorry about that. The public right-of-way continues along the southern boundary of the site. And then the second photograph is more of the community land that will be retained and maintained by the parish council. These next two slides show the existing houses within Meadway, one looking towards the entrance of the site, which is the bottom one here, and then this is looking away from the entrance of the site, typical style of housing within Meadway itself. Moving on, this slide here shows the proposed layout of the 35 dwellings. So as you can see, you've got the left-hand side of the site, which is being retained for the community land, and then the 35 dwellings are laid out in that circular block. We've also got an area of open space on the right-hand side, which includes the SUDS feature, and then the public right-of-way runs along in an amenity buffer zone at the bottom along the southern boundary of the site. The next slide shows the proposed soft landscaping. So again, you can see the SUDS feature here, various trees and walkways that are included within the public open space. You can see the amenity buffer, which will include the public right-of-way, and then the various trees and green verges throughout the site. This next slide shows the proposed street lighting within the site, and then the various light spillage areas marked on there. Officers consider that the lights are evenly distributed across the site to create a safe environment for new occupiers. The next slides show examples of the proposed elevations of the properties. As set out within the officer report, the elevations have evolved during the life of the application to resolve, particularly there was issues with the angles of the roofs and some of the detailing, so that it was akin more to the style of dwellings adjacent to it in Gosfield. So these are one-bedroom properties. We've then got a larger detached property. Again, larger detached properties. Smaller property there. I think that's a 3-bedroom. And then these drawings here, which I think show a good representation of the mixture and style across the site, these street scene drawings. So along the top, you've got section 1.1, which is along the main spine road that runs in from Meadway. And then 2 and 3 are the 2 smaller roads that run east to west. And then along the eastern boundary is this one here. So these are the properties that you would you would see potentially through the trees from Headingham Road. So, finishing as I started with my summary and conclusion, just to make members aware, you will have all been made aware by email correspondence from Emma yesterday about our position with 5-year land supply. Just making reference to it, but in this case, isn't applicable and isn't relevant for this application because the principle of development has already been established by the previous granting of an outline planning permission. Since the submission of the Reserve Matters application, the development has evolved significantly to address concerns raised by officers and consultees, and that was specifically our landscape officer and the urban design consultant. There have been no objections from statutory consultees. Officers consider that the layout, appearance, scale and landscaping is of a high quality and responds positively to the local character and distinctiveness. Future occupiers will benefit from a good standard of amenity, including 100% compliance with the NDSS. There's an acceptable relationship maintained between the proposed dwellings and those neighbouring the site, both on Headingham Road and in Meadway. And therefore, officers recommend that the reserve matters are approved subject to the conditions set out within the committee report. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you. Members. Councillor Cunningham.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I think this is a very satisfactory presentation of reserve matters for this planning application, I think. And the mixture of tenure and the concept drawings we've seen in terms of style and street scene seem to be appropriate and well thought out. Therefore, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to move recommendation for reserve matters on this planning application to be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Before I move on, find a seconder. You second, Councillor Mann. Did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed from the conclusion the lack of objections from technical consultees and the relatively few objections from members of the public, and note the dialogue that has gone on, and I think resulted in a scheme that is acceptable. I know the surrounding roads quite well as a frequent visitor over the years, and I agree that the style of dwellings reflect the sort of the character of the existing development. I don't think existing residents will lose amenity. I don't think they'll be materially harmed in any way. I do, however, agree that it is very prudent to take away permitted development rights under the conditions to protect the amenity of new residents, because the garden sizes are adequate but tight, and I wouldn't want to see them diminished and separation distances reduced as a result. And I'm also pleased, I think, to see the insistence on natural and high quality material. So all in all, I think, Madam Chair, that it's a sustainable development in an appropriate location.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Wrench.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to pick up on the comment on page 12 from Essex Police, which refers to the lighting plan, and how that there were 4 plots, I believe, that although Gosfield, from my knowledge, crime isn't the highest. However, is there anything that could be done, or the officers? I'd just like to hear the officers' opinion if anything would need to be tweaked in order to make that less of a concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wrench. Melanie, would you like to respond when you have?
That means it's on. Oh, yeah, it does. can't remember. Yes, I think if you turn to page 19 within the committee report, because I remember at the time when that comment came in, the plan that was shown as part of the presentation, the lighting plan, I did double check with Essex County Council in terms of the position of the lamp posts that are suggested, and as the road is going to be adopted by Essex County Council, as far as the process that happens, that lighting plan is submitted to Essex County Council for their comment, and if they make suggestions over slightly altered positions, but ultimately it's kind of a discussion between the developer and Essex County Council in terms of where the lamp posts go, as far as my understanding, because the road is going to be put forward for adoption. So I suppose if there does need to be some slight tweaking to ensure that each lamppost covers a number of properties or the properties that have been missed out, that's something that can be discussed between the developer and Essex County Council, and I would have thought it'd be something that perhaps Essex County Council would pick up anyway when they're going through their adoption process.
Thank you, Melanie. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I agree with Councillor Mann about the housing mix. It's good that we've got some affordable housing out of what is a modest-sized scheme. I do hope that the very generous area of community land remains that and doesn't become a future development site. I mean, at the end of the day, this is more countryside being built on, and that looked particularly lovely bit of countryside, but I appreciate this is a reserved matters application. I wanted to make similar comments on the lighting comments from the police. The police tend to make these generic comments about safety, and I don't think it's helpful. I doubt they're listening, but I don't think it's helpful to keep talking about raising the fear of crime. Street lighting is predominantly there so we can see where we're going, so we don't bump into things or fall over. There's very little academic evidence that street lighting per se keeps people safe, per se. It may do in specific locales. And I totally agree with the officer view that the issue here is the distribution around the road, and that becomes therefore an issue for adoption. But I don't think it's helpful to sort of raise fears which aren't really there in the first instance. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The only point I really wanted to make was on condition 6, which is the scheme of landscaping, which is the usual condition, but again we don't have any reference to requirement for the trees and hedges to be irrigated. I think I've made this point before, but I know we have a condition that they should be replaced if they die within 5 years, but it's better that they don't die and that they're properly irrigated in the first few years of life. I don't know whether that would be appropriate to put that in at this stage, Madam Chairman.
We have raised this before, and I think when we've raised it before, Chris did agree that it was something that we could put in, that the trees must be irrigated in the first 2 years, I think it is, regularly. So
I think that's something that could quite easily be added into that condition. I don't know if you've come across something, Tim.
Yes, so my only thought would be we might want to ask for details of a scheme of irrigation before the trees are put in, something along those lines, because if we just say shall be irrigated for 2 years, it's a bit open.
Yeah.
So I suppose the recommendation would be along the lines of a condition that says something like prior to the planting of the trees, a scheme for their irrigation shall be submitted to and agreed. So we wouldn't be delaying development, we would be allowing that level of control. That's acceptable.
thank you. Are you happy with that, Councillor Cunningham, as the mover? And
Very happy, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to raise any? Councillor Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just check with the officer that the land to the west of the actual build is going to be transferred to the parish council? Because that is my understanding, so that should remain a community asset for the parish council and all of the residents.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can come back on that point. So currently actually being negotiated at the moment is how that piece of land will be laid out, where trees will go, where paths will go, where features will go. So that's currently being negotiated and is part of one of the requirements of the Section 106 on the outline application. And at the moment, as far as my understanding is, the Parish Council will be taking that on as their responsibility. Unless they change their mind. But at the moment, that's the discussions in terms of when we're going forward at the moment. And that piece of land, just to come back on a point that Councillor Abbott made, that piece of land was secured via the Section 106. So there's nothing to say that we can't stop someone putting an application in the future, but it's clearly been set out at that stage, back when the outline was approved, that that portion of the site was going to be earmarked for community land.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you very much indeed. Melanie, can you pop your microphone off now, please? Thank you. I know we've all forgotten what we're doing, but we'll get there. Thank you. Well, members, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with an addition to condition 6 that a plan of irrigation should be submitted to the council prior to any planting. All those in favour? Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Thank you. That now brings us on to application 5B, which is application number 201906 REM, land south of Stone Pass Drive, Hatfield Peveril. This can be found on pages 24 to 63, and we do have 3 statements on this application. And the first statement is from Mr. Mark East. Mr. Mark East cannot be here this evening, so his statement is going to be read by Mr. Kevin Dale. Mr. Dale, please. Mr. Dale, I just remind you have 3 minutes to make Mr. East's statement for him. Thank you. Yes, please. That's lovely. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm reading a statement on behalf of my neighbour, Mr. East. He couldn't be here today. The application is at committee. There's been considerable public and press interest in this case. That's probably the result of both the judicial review and then the Secretary of State's call-in. Mr. East has made 4 points in his statement. Firstly, was the non-compliance of the external lighting scheme, which your officers have determined unresolvable. And that's despite years of planning that have gone in to date. And we particularly regret in the village that our NDP policy H04 that was set out to help with this has not even been acknowledged in the officers' review. Secondly, in that made neighbourhood development plan, the NDP specifies that a development of this size has to provide 10 wheelchair units. The scheme before you doesn't comply with this, only providing 2 units at the point of completion. Thirdly is the density of development. This now exceeds that of the adjacent housing estates. The high density has been partially achieved by the hedgerow and tree loss that's been negotiated after the call-in decision report. And finally, his 4th point is one of air quality. It has come to light since the planning was granted from multiple and very credible official sources that this site has air quality which fails World Health Organization standards. In fact, the reason that Mr. East is not here tonight is because after a lifetime living at the site, he's self-isolating whilst his wife continues to receive treatment for her air quality related lung cancer. They've lived there 38 years. I know Mr. East has written to all the councillors with details of these concerning details, and I suggest on the basis of these concerns, particularly the air quality, the reserve matters can't be approved today and that the scheme should be sent back and re-reviewed.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Thank you very much indeed. The next statement is made by Hatfield Peveril Parish Council, and it is to be read by Alison. Alison, please, if you could read their statement for us.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chairman and members. As you will have seen from the Parish Council's comments on the planning portal, the officer's report and also the applicant's leaflet submitted to members last week, the applicants and their agent have had ongoing dialogue with the Parish Council on site and via virtual meetings, emails and telephone calls. The Parish Council welcomes the various revisions made and on the whole is now agreeable to the application for reserved matters, having discussed its concerns on various issues with the applicants and the same having mostly been addressed by them or reasons given why not. On reading the officer's report, the Parish Council acknowledges the reasons given on specific issues that they have raised and requested, including density, permitted development rights and planting by the 2.5 wall on the western boundary. However, it is disappointing to read on page 44 that the proposal of planting 3 Scots pine to compensate for the loss of Scots pine T43 is no longer being considered, and the decision is to plant 1 oak and 4 maple trees in the hedgerow to the north of the Suds area. The Parish Council reluctantly agreed to compromise with the loss of this tree with the planting of 3 Scots pine in the Suds area. The Scots pine is obviously a very different tree to an oak, and the same visual impact against the setting will not be achieved in the future, and also wildlife habitat has been lost. We would urge members to consider this, please. Also, whilst it is acknowledged that the group of trees G14 along Crabs Hill are in decline and need to be removed for site access, page 58, and that the proposed planting on the site mitigates the loss of the trees, the Parish Council is concerned that the rural visual appearance along Crabs Hill will be lost and will request members to again consider this loss. With regard to a communal electric charging point referred to in page 45 of the officer's report, may we bring to members' attention that on the Glen Eagles Reserved Matters application approved in February of this year, the developer agreed to provide a communal electric charging point in a visitor area. A communal electric charging point needs to be provided to comply with policy F12 for this development. The Parish Council wishes to thank both the applicants and BDC's officers for acknowledging the importance of the York flagstones and for working with the Parish Council to ensure the same will be relayed in their original position and to communicate their origin and historical significance. Thank you for your time. That's the end of the statement. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. The final statement this evening on this application is being read by Mr. Oliver Spencer. He is the agent from Andrew Martin Planning. Mr. Spencer, please.
Good evening, councillors.
Good evening.
I'm Olivier Spencer from Andrew Martin Planning, and I'm here to represent the applicant, Bellway Homes. Bellway became the owners of the land south of Stonepath Drive, Hatfield Peveril, last spring, and held a series of pre-application meetings with your planning, urban design and landscape officers, and an on-site meeting with the Parish Council to discuss the emerging detailed plans. These discussions culminated in the submission of a Reserved Matters application in November 2020 and were followed by additional meetings and consultation with your officers and the Parish Council over the winter to arrive at the plans currently before you. The detailed proposals include 140 dwellings, 56 of which will be affordable homes, public open space and a children's play area with 7 different pieces of play equipment near the site entrance, a tree-lined central main road, new areas of tree and hedge planting, and the transfer of 3.5 hectares of community land to the parish. The housing mix includes 1-bedroom apartments, 2- and 3-bedroom bungalows, and 2-, 3-, 4- and 5-bedroom houses to address a broad range of housing needs. 10% of all dwellings on site will be bungalows. The design draws on positive features identified in the local area, such as the use of traditional materials and detailing, and proposes render and weatherboarding in pastel colours near to Crabs Hill. Importantly, changes have been made to the scheme to address the feedback from stakeholders. These changes comprise fewer gable ends and more chimneys and brick boundary walls to improve the appearance of the scheme, bound gravel paths around the perimeter of the site, 75 new trees in a thicker tree belt along the southern boundary, 3 new Scots pine trees to replace the 1 Scots pine being lost, scattered tree planting, a hedge, and a line of 15 new cherry trees near the site entrance, the retention and relaying of the historic York flagstones along the public right-of-way once construction is complete and as agreed with the parish, and the provision of high-speed fibre broadband and infrastructure for the installation of electric vehicle charging points. The scheme also includes over £540,000 in planning contributions towards enhanced local facilities, including outdoor sport, education, healthcare, ecological mitigation and the future maintenance of the community land to the west. Finally, the Council's officers have seen fit to recommend the scheme for approval, so with this in mind I respectfully request that members follow this advice and grant consent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't usually ask people that come to make a statement a question, but you just said you're going to replace the 3 Scots pines with 3 Scots pines, but that is not what we have in our report. So,
Yes, it's definitely part of the plans that 1 Scots pine tree is being removed towards the west of the site and being replaced with 3 new Scots pine trees around the Suds Basin.
well, our report says, but following an increase of the area required for the Suds drainage, it has been decided to provide only 1 oak tree.
There'll be an oak tree as well, but there's an oak tree, 3 new Scots pines, and I think 5 field maple trees as well.
Thank you. I'm just clarifying that what I read was goes with what you've said. Thank you very much for attending our meeting. Thank you. Members, that brings us to the end of people making a statement, and I will now go on to the presentation. And the presentation is going to be made by Catherine Ullman, and she is also in the chamber this evening.
Thank you. Get this on the screen for you guys. Okay. So, yes, as you know, it's a reserved matters application which seeks detailed approval for the appearance, landscaping, layout and scale of an outline approval first submitted in 2016, but not granted until by the Secretary of State until 2019, and then it was subsequently varied following that in 2020. Ultimately, gives permission for the erection of up to 140 dwellings on the site, open space, local equipped area of play, refuse collection, biodiversity management, noise mitigation and external lighting. The site is located sort of due west of Hatfield Peveril, with the A12 you can see up there in the north. The site is outlined in the red line. In the blue line you have the community land, which is to be transferred to the Parish Council under the terms of the Section 106 agreement, which was agreed as part of the outline consent. To the west of the site, you can see here Hatfield Place. That's a Grade 2 star listed building, currently being used for events and wedding venue. And to the north here, this is another Grade 2 star listed building, the William Boosie Public House. They are both approximately 120 metres from the site boundary. And to the south, this looks out towards the valley of the River Chelmer. In the east is Crabs Hill. In sort of this corner here, this is Church Road, and here we have Stonepath Drive. This is an aerial view of the site. just to show you sort of the extent of existing vegetation and to point out to you the location of 2 oak trees, which are of high quality and proposed to be retained, and also the location of the Scots pine, which we shall come to sort of later in the presentation. These photographs show you, sort of give you a general flavour of the existing style of development in the surrounding area. So this is Stonepath Drive, sort of immediately opposite the site really. You've got sort of large detached dwellings, sort of estate arrangement with sort of red brick and dark tiled roofs there. And sort of just on the junction with Church Road, there's some bungalows which are rendered. So a slightly earlier period it looks like. The site shown here in the Stonepath Drive, sort of on the left of the shot. You can see sort of the existing sort of hedgerow as such, it's termed really, but it's more of just sort of gappy sort of arrangement of trees and scrub. And Stonepath Drive junction here with Church Road, the site, and the site access sort of approximately in this location here as was agreed at the outline. So now we're within the site, looking towards Stonepath Drive. You can see those properties I pointed out sort of previously. You can see there's quite a strong vegetative boundary to the north, which has got some sort of good trees in it there. And you can see that there's a sort of permissive path which currently crosses the site and sort of leads out towards the community land, sort of as it would be over here. So a view looking southwest from within the site towards the valley of the River Chalmers, sort of in the distance really. That oak tree and that Scots pine, which I pointed out earlier. So here we're really looking at sort of views from the community lands, not from the site itself. So in this photograph here, I'm standing approximately here, looking in this direction, and you can see the William Boosie public house to the sort of right of the photograph there, and you can't see sort of Hatfield Place because it's sort of beyond the hedgerow, but this would be sort of the area of community land. And then again, now I'm right at the very edge of the community land, sort of looking towards Hatfield Place, and this is what I can see. You can see there is a track in between the two, and then the house itself is located behind this tree within its own grounds. So looking within the site again, now sort of I'm within the red line, as it were, just on the very edge of it. So that's sort of marked really by this sort of like new hedgerow really. And then beyond that is community land, and then Hatfield Place beyond that. So I'm sort of standing here. So now we're sort of in the bottom of the site really, sort of next to Crabs Hill, looking upwards towards Stonepath Drive in the very distance there, and this is the boundary with Crabs Hill. You can see it's sort of, it's okay, but it's not a great hedgerow as such, and the proposal does seek to provide quite a lot of supplementary planting to that hedgerow, which I'll sort of come to later in the presentation really. So, the reserved matters application is required under a condition of the outline consent to be in broad compliance with the development framework plan, which is shown before you here. So you can see the plan shows the site access as it's been agreed in this location coming off Stonepath Drive. It then shows a sort of indicative road arrangement, which would be a sort of a main sort of spine road really, I suppose, in an L shape, and then a sort of cul-de-sac layout branching off of that. And the right of way it shows in the red sort of dotted line here would be retained. So yeah, this is a public right of way, just to be clear, that runs from this point here at Church Road all the way through the site and out towards the community land. There's a area of open space shown in the north here, and a children's play area located proposed here. The reserve matters is also required to demonstrate compliance with the Green Infrastructure Strategy drawing, and that's shown before you here. This plan limits the extent of the developable area to that shown in the grey shading. It shows that there is proposed to be some trees and a green verge along the central spine road, and that there would be a surfaced route running along the perimeter of the site, sort of marked by this dotted yellow line. It shows again the children's play area in the open space in the north, and a suds area located here. So this is the tree retention plan as it was agreed under the varied version of the outline consent. This is linked to the tree protection plan that's required under condition 21 of the outline consent. And it shows sort of clearly that these trees along the northern boundary are being retained, and here sort of along this western boundary, that those two oaks I pointed out to be retained, and this hedgerow, but this hedgerow here is agreed to be lost, and the Scots pine tree again agreed to be lost. And if I just take you back to the Green Infrastructure Strategy, these little sort of orange stars for what was agreed as being the compensatory planting. So 3 Scots pines trees in the suds area compensate for the loss of that sort of Scots pine tree which was within the site itself. And again, you can see that there's sort of additional planting indicatively shown sort of along this boundary in the south to sort of provide additional screening, and then there's the retention of trees, etc., in the hedgerow to Crabs Hill. So this is the development layout that you have before you. It, in the officer's opinion, shows a good mix of sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom properties. So you've got sort of 43% 1 and 2 beds, a total of 84 open market and 39 affordable housing dwellings, and sort of overall a good mixture really in terms of sort of the size of the dwellings themselves. Now the development layout is considered by officers to be fairly in line with what was initially sort of agreed under the outline, and those sort of parameters really. So you've got the main estate road coming through in an L shape, and then cul-de-sac sort of roads coming off that. Play areas being provided here. The open space areas being provided in the north. There's additional planting. Sort of, if I just do this, it's going to help you a lot, isn't it? Along here. And there's the suds area down here, and we'll come to that sort of detail of that in due course. Again, you've got the community land as well being provided. And we've also got a surface route being provided along the edge of the site. You can just see it sort of snaking through there, and that's in breed and gravel. So as I said, sort of initially stated, that there are most of the principles in the Green Infrastructure Strategy have been adhered to. So you've got this sort of hedgerow being retained, you've got the trees there, you've got the verge going along the main spine road with trees, avenue of trees. You've got the surfaced route, you've got the additional buffer here, and the sort of broad sort of location of the open space and the play area are also consistent. As noted in your report, due to practical constraints, there has had to be some minor divergence from the green infrastructure layout in places. So, for example, in the north of the site, the green infrastructure plan showed a new hedgerow to be provided in this location, sort of along the alignment really of the existing hedgerow. So it's now proposed to set that hedgerow further into the site, and that is due to the limitations of an easement which was discovered in the area of the existing hedgerow. And this existing hedgerow is still shown to be retained, subject to obviously provision of the visibility stay in the places that have already been agreed. Furthermore, there proved to be insufficient space between the existing footpath, as shown in the red dotted line, and the developable area in the grey, to run a line of new trees, as shown. Especially since it was resolved to relay the historic York flagstones, which provided a historic path originally along Stone Path Meadow in this area too. So you can see those little dots there, they're the flagstones. Instead, the footpath is still retained along its existing alignment. It's not obviously marked on this plan, but it's there and you can pass it. And then an all-weather path was to be provided 2 metres wide, snaking through the open space instead. And overall, more trees are proposed than was originally the case in the Green Infrastructure Plan. The officers are of the view that these changes still respect the principles as they were shown in the Green Infrastructure Strategy and would not result in any additional adverse impacts. Therefore, the reserve matters layout does demonstrate that to all practical extents the GIS, or Green Infrastructure Strategy, is complied with. Now turning to the SUDS area and the changes there. So the detailed engineering of the SUDS feature has also led to some differences with the Green Infrastructure Strategy in this area, as originally shown. So here you have the sort of original layout which was shown, and as you can see, it allowed for 9 trees to be planted, 3 of which were the replacement Scots pine trees. The location of these trees has been altered in order that they can be given sufficient space to grow. So we do still have 3 Scots pines, 1, 2, 3, still provided, 1 oak tree, and 5 field maple, in a manner which still preserves the drainage capability and biodiversity benefits required. And if you turn to your report, sort of page 44, I think there may have been a misunderstanding, but it does say the applicant still proposes 3 Scots pine trees. And so that, apologies if that has, there's been a misunderstanding in that area, but I can assure you there are 3. So now turning to the detailed planting, which is a requirement under condition 10 of the outline consent for it to be submitted concurrently with reserve matters. This planting is acceptable to the landscape officer. Whether the elm trees get removed under the outstanding conditions on the outline consent for relating to construction management and tree protection or not. Therefore, this is the group of elm trees which have got Dutch elm disease. It's not really a matter for the reserved matters submission, because nothing in this submission sort of shows or gives consent for removal of these trees. It's a matter that's dealt with, or should be dealt with, under the conditions. And those conditions have been submitted, but the details for that, but they're still outstanding. So it's not a matter for members to consider in this particular case. Turning to the storey heights, again, and these are compliant with condition 6, which was on the outline consent, and required that there are single-storey dwellings in this area here in order to preserve, and protect the setting of the listed buildings. And elsewhere, it's 2-storey really, in consistency really with elsewhere in the area. proposed materials have been chosen to reflect those in the locality, with a combination of traditional red and buff bricks, grey slates and red plain tiles, weatherboarding and render. Street elevations for you here. You can see elevation. This is section A, and it's shown here. That's facing Stonepath Drive. You can see a regular arrangement of detached two-storey houses with a mixture of brick and tile, similar really to the modern estate development on Stonepath Drive in its character, I would say. Elevation B is along the sort of main spine road here. In this sort of has quite a strikingly different character, I would suggest. A regular uniform pattern of semi-detached properties set back behind a central verge and trees. Elevation D is looking sort of in, really, I suppose, from the community land sort of towards the edge of development. And you can see that the elevation sort of facing the community land in Hatfield Place, the scale is reduced, and a similar character dwellings, really, buff brick and red tile is proposed. And E and F are those sort of periphery of the development which faces out towards Crabs Hill and out to the valley in the south. Those are the sort of more they're the transitions, really, I suppose, with the countryside. They have been designed to have a more rural character, with a more organic placement of dwellings and a simple render and boarded appearance. Affordable housing is shown for you here. It's in small groups, but also close enough, I would suggest, to be managed easily, and there's no objections to this arrangement from the housing enabling officer. You've got 30% shared ownership and 70% affordable rent dwellings, which again accords with the housing enabling officer's recommendations. Proposed parking. There's sufficient parking in accordance with the Essex parking standards. And as mentioned in your report, there are quite a few tandem spaces, but policy FI2 of the neighbourhood plan does not specifically prevent this. In all other respects, the parking layout complies with the aspirations of this policy and policy HO1 of the neighbourhood plan. In reference to the 10% wheelchair units, so it's officer's view as set out on page 45 of your reports, that the proposal does provide 10% wheelchair units and therefore is compliant, noting, of course, that the neighbourhood plan does not contain a specific definition as to what constitutes a wheelchair unit. Turning to electrical vehicle charging, so private electric vehicle charging provision is made for all dwellings in accordance with policy FI2 of the neighbourhood plan. However, as noted in your report, in the communal areas this has not been provided, as is suggested within the policy, and therefore on the face of it there would only be partial compliance with this policy. The neighbourhood plan policy says that new development should include provision of a public charging point in communal parking areas such as flats, etc. However, officers have noted that all flats and dwellings will have the potential to access their own charging point. Therefore, any visitors to the development would have use of this. And as this is not a development which provides a destination really, other than the residential component itself, it's not considered that it would be in and of itself sufficient reason for refusal. Vehicle tracking analysis has been provided, and this shows that fire services, large vehicles can be tracked throughout the site. The highway authorities made no objections to this proposal. Garden size analysis has been provided because the neighbourhood plan sets its own stipulations as well as those over and above what's in the Essex Design Guide, and officers have found the proposal to be compliant with both those criteria. Lighting. So a lighting scheme was required on condition 13 of the outline consent to be submitted concurrently with the reserve matters. The main reason for this given was to ensure that the lighting proposed on the site protects the interests of biodiversity. An initial layout was submitted, as shown to you here, and apologies if it's not terribly clear, but what it does show is that the main road here and the shared space areas would be lit by street lights, but that the private drives and the sort of walk around the periphery would not. This layout was found to be acceptable from the point of view of the council's ecologist and the designing out crime officer at Essex Police. This approach would also have been consistent with the lighting rationale applied in the local area, for example, as observed at on Stonepath Drive, really. Then, in response to comments from Essex County Council Highways, and this really references a policy which they have, which came into force between the outline and reserve matters stages, the lighting scheme was amended to remove the lighting in the shared space areas. And this is because Essex County Council refused to adopt these areas otherwise. So the street lighting is therefore confined to this area as shown, and the development would otherwise only be lit by light spillage from the external and internal lighting of private properties. This then gave rise to concerns as raised from the designing crime officer and from the local residents that the lighting strategy did not comply with the policies. Now, as officers, we've worked hard to find a solution, but due to the green infrastructure strategy criteria being so limiting in terms of the developable area and the particular landscape and biodiversity constraints on this site, it's not been possible to arrive at an alternative road format at this late stage in the process. Therefore, officers have had to advise that the lighting scheme fundamentally doesn't promote a safe and secure environment or achieve crime reduction and prevention to the extent that they interpret the policies would normally aspire to. Turning to the policies themselves, I mean, they are set out in full in your report. We do obviously have an SPD on external lighting, which advocates a contextual and balanced approach. And the SPD, I think I recall, is very out of date, but it does suggest that within it that there is insufficient evidence that street lighting does reduce crime. My understanding, however, is that the situation has moved on somewhat since then, and the Secured by Design standards does actually cite a number of case studies which support the importance of lighting, particularly in cul-de-sac formats. If you do look at the policies, however, they are not prescriptive, essentially requiring a judgment to be made which balances the competing interests such as safety, biodiversity and landscape concerns. However, if a contextual approach is to be the one taken, it cannot be said that the scheme achieves the same levels of lighting as the streets in the surrounding area. Policy HA4 is before you here in full from the Hatfield-Peveril Neighbourhood Plan. Again, it broadly emphasises the importance of developments designing out crime and advocates incorporating secured by design methods. But fundamentally, again, is reliant on judgment as to whether there is compliance with the policy or not. Hard and fast rules on the issue are absent. So looking into secured by design and what it actually does say, the criteria themselves, again, there is no prescription, but they do require that lighting is no more than necessary to ensure safety. So it's minimised where possible. It's the minimum that you need. Again, advocate a contextual approach. So, specific consideration of the location itself, you know, all sorts of things, how prevalent crime is, whether it's an urban area, whether it's a rural area, you know, the impacts it may have. It does sort of quite clearly say that footpaths used 24/7 and which are fundamentally safe design should be lit. But Chapter 18 sort of advocates, it says, you know, all street lighting needs to be conforming with the British standard. British standard really relates to the technicalities, so how closely the light columns need to be apart, how high they need to be, that type of thing. Secured by Design discourages the switching off of lighting where it is present, and it discourages bollard lighting because, you know, the problem with that is you can't see people's faces, and so therefore, you know, other than a wayfinder, they don't really do much in terms of crime prevention. And it encourages environmentally friendly lighting, so LED formats, that type of thing. But ultimately, it is a matter of judgment as to whether a proposal, you know, would safeguard those interests, you know, of pedestrians, etc., and users of the development or not. So, you know, in cases where there is a very constrained and historic sort of outline consent which dictates sort of to a large degree really how flexible the layout itself can be and limits it, and where there are no practical alternatives really available, I think it's officers' view that permission should not really be refused on the grounds of design, really turning, I suppose, to that overarching policy in the NPPF paragraph 130 that permission should only be refused or should be refused for development of poor design that fails to take the opportunities available for improving the character and quality of the area and the way it functions. And it's really all about sort of what opportunities really are available or aren't. And in this case, there aren't. And therefore, I think, you know, officers have to say there is a degree of conflict with the aspirations of both the local and national policies concerning crime prevention and personal safety. But in this case, it's not sufficient to lead to a conflict with the development plan or the NPPF as a whole. And members, you will have to decide as to, you know, reach your own judgments really in this case. And they, of course, may be exceptional to that reached in other cases which come before you in the future, because this would be dealt with on a case-by-case basis and very specific in terms of the constraints on this site. So in summary, it's noted that the application has been subject to several revisions which have aimed to address a number of concerns raised by the parish council, local residents and consultees, and the council's urban design consultant. It's however acknowledged that there remain a number of practical constraints which prevent further opportunities being taken to improve the quality and character of the area and the way it functions. And the proposal is however considered to be sufficiently compliant with the development plan when read as a whole, and has remained consistent with the conditions stipulated in the outline consent. So therefore, on balance, officers respectfully recommend approval with the controlling conditions as they have been set out in your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed for a very detailed presentation. Members. It's like being at the cinema. Lights on. If anyone can remember that.
I'll just cease my screen sharing.
That's Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Catherine, for a very, very detailed report. This site has, well, to say it's got a complicated background is probably an understatement. And I think for many of us it is quite good to see that it's actually before us this evening and is reaching at least some sort of conclusion in terms of determination anyway. I think it's good to see that the parish council are largely pleased with what has been achieved, and I think it is very welcome that the developer, and all credit to the parish council as well for working with them and with officers to try and resolve some of the issues that everybody was concerned about. And it isn't always the case that developers work closely with parish councils, even on sites of this size, so that's certainly very good to see. I do think that Catherine covered the majority of the points raised, and particularly referring to the statement read by Mr. Dale on behalf of Mr. East. The lighting point is quite complex. Catherine did cover it, and I know this is a really basic summing up of it, but would I sort of be right in saying that there is a disconnect between what we would ideally like to see on the site and what is actually achievable? Is that, I know that's a very basic summing up, but is that?
Yeah, I think on this particular site, that's the case. I think had we been earlier on in the process, we could have there are alternatives open to you to adopt a different road layout or a different arrangement, or set the footpath in so it wouldn't necessarily have such an impact, on the vegetation and the biodiversity benefit that's given from that. So, had it been thought about earlier on in the process, had we been aware of this, but of course we couldn't have been because the policies only come in between sort of the outline and the reserve matters. So, and because the constraints as imposed with the green infrastructure strategy are such that, that you can't really change the layout to any great degree, in this particular case it hasn't been possible, and as you say, sort of a disconnect has arisen.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Catherine. All right, so yes, sort of several years down the line, I think this is the best that we can achieve on this site, and I appreciate that quite a lot of discussion has gone into how we can do the best we can, and this is it. In terms of the affordable housing, that is very welcome. I think the points raised by Mr. East about wheelchair bungalows has been covered. There are 14, and they are going to be or are able to be wheelchair friendly, which is very good. The landscaping seems to me to be more than adequate. I do think the developer's gone to quite some lengths to ensure that what has to be removed is being more than replaced. I appreciate that not everybody will see it that way, but I do think from the point of view of granting permission, then it is more than adequate. I think I will leave it there. I will actually move officer's recommendation for approval, Madam Chairman, but I'll leave any further comments to colleagues if they have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did it find a seconder? Councillor Mann, are you seconding, or do you wish to speak? I'm not quite sure.
I wish to speak.
I do need to find a seconder before I move on.
Have it seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Mann, I'll come to Councillor Abbott. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sort of three points. The lengthy dialogue with the parish council appears to be a model, and it has really benefited the scheme. And I note, public rejections down to I think about 10 households, which is, given the history of this site, is quite remarkable. That's the sort of first point. I mean, there are positives. Second point, the transfer of the land to community use is considerable, and note that it comes with a dowry as well, which is important for the future maintenance of that area for the community. I think the strongest point for me is the mix of of housing. I mean, it's rarely that we can say this, but it does provide a pretty good mix with a match for our actually assessed local housing needs, which most developers tend to sort of totally ignore. I mean, 42% 1 and 2 bedroom properties, only 3 of the dreaded 5 bedroom massive houses, 40%, affordable, another sort of 56 units, and even the magic 14 bungalows that will really impress, I'm sure, some of our local commentators. I think the overall layout does maintain the area's prevailing character and setting. So I don't think there's much of a clash there. But I mean, for me, it does very much remain on balance. And I think that just sufficient positives to tip it over into supporting the recommendation, which given the history, I didn't think as a conclusion that I would have come to. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to start, to make the same point as I've made many times before, and I appreciate it's not necessarily officers' fault, but some of those plans, just couldn't read them, particularly the planting plan. The writing, in my eyesight's not brilliant, but I don't think many other members may, unless they've got binoculars, would have been able to read much of that. I don't know how we get round that, but if we're projecting onto screens this large, maybe it's an issue for the council to talk to developers, and that must apply to a lot of people reading paper plans as well. Yes, some of the points Councillor Mann said I agree with. The mix is quite good actually compared to some other sites we can compare with. I thought the story height plan is very sensible in terms of the edge onto the community land and the listed buildings. However, then there's all the bad stuff. Yet again, we have a site where there is no on-site services facilities. Now, we've come to expect this, and we only really expect it on the larger sites. But in some of the larger villages, like Hatfield, Peveril, Silverend's another one, just the default is we're going to get a contribution towards GP or contribution towards the schools. And yet local people know what the actual situation is with those GPs and those schools. And so the pressure actually in reality just keeps ramping up with more and more people coming to live there, but not the essential infrastructures to support them. Now, I know this site isn't large enough for that, but Hatfield, Peveril, like Silverend, Cresting and many other places, had a lot of these sort of size developments added on, and that's just ramping up the pressure on those services. Officers, one question for them. I'm assuming the answer is no, there's no renewable energy on this site. And therefore, whilst it's good that we're seeing we've got electrical vehicle charging, we're completely missing a trick, of course, on terms of sustainability. We could be having a site where we're both generating energy from the sun and charging cars at the same time. I mean, perfect circle, but we're not doing it. So we're putting more demand on the grid because, unfortunately, charging electric vehicles is quite electricity heavy. We're missing an opportunity. I think the air quality issue is a very important one, and particularly in Hatfield Peveril, there's very specific air quality issues. So the A12 is due to be widened to 6 lanes to take more traffic. That means there's going to be more emissions of particulates, oxides of sulphur, etc., and nitrogen. And there's also an issue in Hatfield Peveril, particularly with the junctions. And queuing on existing junctions, particularly the roads which lead out from this development onto the main road that goes through the village, they're clearly only going to get worse. And more queuing, more static traffic and more emissions. So I think the point on air quality is important. In terms of hedge and tree loss, it's not major, but there is some loss. But it's good to see again the community land, and I hope it stays community land, same point as last one. I thought the issue on the Scots Pines was quite interesting because that initial plan where the Scots Pines were going to be, they're quite big trees. So I don't know who worked out they were going to have three that close together. They'd be very, very thin trees, I think. On the parking, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not going to support this application, I really dislike the tandem parking. And I know the officers say off-site it shouldn't cause a problem, but I think the more important thing we should be looking at is on-site. We've got so many developments where the parking provision is not adequate. I don't particularly like, thinking about having to provide lots and lots of parking because it's not that sustainable. But in a location like this, people will have a number of cars, and what we will probably end up with is a lot of on-street parking. And some of the estates that have been granted in the last 10 years, that causes problems. People park on the pavements in particular. And then I think that's all I was going to say on all those issues. And then coming on to the issue of the lighting, same comment as before, really. Police making the same generic comment. I dispute the fact there's clear statistical or academic evidence that lighting per se prevents crime. And in fact, if you go round the villages in Essex which have never had lighting, some of them quite large ones, the residents don't want it because they think it brings crime and problem into the villages. And I think we have to get away from this generic position. However, having said that, given that the main constraint on this site was to do with biodiversity, it is regrettable, and I am interested in the fact there are some areas that have got no lighting, as to why more innovative approaches are not taken. Now, there's compared to 20, 30 years ago, there's every type of light under the sun you can have now. And one of the things you can do in biodiversity sensitive areas is you can use very low colour temperature LED lights, perhaps on sensors. So, the county council, unfortunately, tends not to look at this. They look at their bog standard white LEDs, street light columns. So there are approaches where you could perhaps have a compromise, because I take the point that some are making, but it is what it is. And finally, Madam Chairman, I obviously welcome the fact there's been the detailed negotiation with the parish council, which is good to see. But there's sufficient things in here that I'm concerned about that I won't support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Anyone else wish to make any comments before Councillor Johnson? Sorry, then Councillor Rich.
I'll shut up straight. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to make a point here with there's an area of conflict here with pollution when we look at things overall. With more and more electric vehicles being taken up, surely we've been advised that pollution levels are going down, otherwise we're supportive of it all. I don't understand that. So we're talking about possible increase in pollution on the A12. But if more and more electric cars are coming, it surely goes down, doesn't it? Or are we all wasting our time buying electric vehicles? I'm lost. I just don't know.
What about pollution producing the electricity to make the cars work? Or is it's Councillor Rich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to add to that. The A12 has been widened, and it means that the locals can get onto the roads quicker without having to queue up at peak times. Hopefully that may help. The other thing that I noted in the report is that it's good to see how a neighbourhood plan can actually contribute towards developers working with local communities. And I think this sets a fine example and we should commend Hatfield Peveril for the work they've done, because I think they're starting to see some justification. I know because of the life cycle of this plan they couldn't get everything in that they probably wanted to, but it's still to be commended. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Rich. Councillor Swear, I didn't know if I saw your hand or not. I'm sorry. I've got, yeah, okay, Councillor Swear, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think there are several good points about this application, although I know that the site is very restricted with the density. Basically, I'm very pleased to see single-level residency there, which I think is very important as a mix going forward. Also, the full fibre availability to all residents, and obviously the EV charging points. And I take Councillor Abbott's point on that, but I do think in the future that the residents there will probably benefit from government grants, so that that whole renewable energy will actually complete that circle and help that. And I was going to mention the point that Councillor Hilton made about air quality. I think over time one would hope to see that improve, because I think that's relevant. But the point is, could I just ask the officer, I'm a bit concerned about the suds in extreme cases. what is the depth of that sunset, and is there any danger to any public as it's very close to pedestrian use? I mean, is it fenced off? I would like a bit more information on that, please.
Yeah, I did query this. I'm just trying to recall the detail. But the slope is within the required guidelines. So when the Essex County Council SUDS team assess the application, they assess whether it's got a necessity to have sort of railings around it or not. And in this particular instance, they haven't required it because it is gentle enough in order not to. And it, I think, understandably, is going to be most of the time dry. So yeah, we're satisfied that it's suitable.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for answering that. Councillor Abbott.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure I heard an answer on my question about whether there's any renewables. I might have missed it, but also I just wanted very briefly to say I do agree with the point that in the longer term, but decades down the line, air quality should improve in areas like this and in major roads, but they're decades away. But it's quite wrong to say that there'll be better access to the A12. The plans for the A12 show most of the junctions around Hatfield Pebble will be removed. And a particular issue that was raised by Councillor Louis, who represents Hatfield Pebble at county level, and the Cabinet member and others at County Hall, was the pressure on the junctions within Hatfield Pebble due to the reconfiguration of the A12. I just thought I'd make that point, Chair.
Councillor Abbott, I know you've raised the subject of renewables on many an occasion, and I think we've been told that we don't have a policy whereby we can ask for these at the present time, and I think perhaps now is the time when we should be, when we're looking at the new plan, when we should be looking for things like that. But I will ask Catherine to answer.
Yes, thank you. Just to add on page 46 of the report, at the top there is a policy within the Hatfield Pebble neighbourhood plan which does require all new development to demonstrate an innovative approach to low carbon sustainable design that meets the BREEAM home quality mark standards, excellent where viable. However, I think what is critical here is that it isn't outline consent has been granted for 140 dwellings or up to 140 dwellings on this site, and therefore officers' view is that policy applies at the outline stage, and therefore going forward when and if development is proposed sort of that hits this policy, officers will be requiring that criteria to be adhered to. But in this particular case, given its reserved matters, no, there isn't a suitable policy basis to require it here.
Thank you, Catherine. Have I missed anyone's hand? I'm sorry if I have, because... No? Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Cunningham that we grant this application. I'm going to now put that to the vote. All those in favour of granting this application? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those against? 1 against. That application has been granted. Thank you, members. And thank you, officers. And thank you, Alison. And that brings us to the end of the meeting. I'll close the meeting. It could be 8:35, 6, 7 or 8, depending on which clock you look at. I wonder if it's possible we could have the clocks all saying the same time in this room. It would be wonderfully helpful. And thank you and good night, everyone. And for once I can say have a safe journey home.